Well, David Lombardi, if you have to go from this conversation, like if you have to go cover the Brock Purdy contract extension or brand new contract he's signing, I'll let you go. I kind of understand, like that is the A1 topic and headline that everybody's just waiting to cover, right? And it's not a matter of if it happens, it's only when does it happen and what are the numbers on the paper. That's how it goes, right?
Well, there are people still trying to make it an argument of if, but it is not an argument of if. Anybody that is in any way connected to the decision-making here knows that it's a matter of when. I think that's been reinforced by the week of the Super Bowl when you have so many prominent voices in the NFL all saying the same thing.
Right.
John Gruden being one of the most recent. It's a matter of when. And I think if you're going to talk about timing, you probably have to have the exact salary cap total be released. And that is dependent on NFL revenues. And the NFL is not going to know its exact revenue total for the season until a couple of weeks after the Super Bowl, when they can crunch all the numbers, determine where the cap is going to be. And for the 49ers, this is a team that they're playing financial Tetris. They have the most big contracts on their books of any team in the league. Shanahan and Lynch have literally given out the most A-list contracts of any team in the NFL since 2017. So when room is tight, when you have to, and they've surfed the wave really well so far. They haven't entered salary cap hell like other teams like the Saints or the Rams. So when you're trying to continue to do that, you have to be really careful with how every million is allocated. And I think they need to know the certainty of where the cap is going to be based on those revenues before they can sit down and have truly substantive negotiations with Purdy.
I mean, that obviously makes sense. You want to wait to know what the numbers and the constraints are going to be before you actually get into it. In terms of the magnitude of this contract, this signing, this quarterback, is this like make or break for the team and their contention in the next couple of years, or is it some lesser magnitude than that?
I think make or break for the team is whether or not Brock Purdy's on the roster, right? You have to have a quarterback. As far as paying him, you can really do damage to your long-term chances if you don't structure it correctly.
Got it.
So I don't know if that's make or break for the next 2 years. But the 49ers, ever since Lynch and Shanahan have come aboard, a common theme has been they want to be as good as possible in the short term, but they want to make it sustainable for the long term. They have looked at the Patriots. They've looked at the Baltimore Ravens. They've looked at the dynastic 49ers teams, although those teams did not have to deal with the salary cap until the end when it sunk them in the late 1990s. But they have looked at sustainability as one of the pillars around which they're going to try to operate. And they want to be aggressive within the bounds of sustainability under the salary cap. So any deal that you make that's very big can be what, I use for the salary cap. I use this as an analogy. I use the sink theory as an analogy. Every single season, you've got a sink, and water, which is expenditures, is pouring into the sink, and you've got to prevent that water from overflowing. Now, salary cap space that you do not use transfers over to future seasons. So there's a drain at the bottom of each sink that goes into a pipe that connects to the other sink. So you manage flow control. You have to, the 2026 sink is at this level. All right, let's let a little bit of water out through a restructure. Let's cut somebody, do whatever we need. Let's make sure that 2026 and 2027 are at appropriate levels. So you're constantly having to think not only about 2025, but you're thinking about 2026, 2027, which is why the 49ers over the past 2 years have carried over the most space out of any team in the NFL from season to season, despite all their expenditures. It outlines a clear spending and restructuring strategy to where they're actually trying to push as much money out into the future with restructures because they understand that salary cap space now is more valuable than salary cap space later because the salary cap is increasing every year along with NFL revenue. So the Taylor Swift effect, ironically, is helping the 49ers pay Brock Purdy and keep this team together.
I got a kitchen sink reference already and a Taylor Swift reference. By the way, I'm more of a dishwasher guy. Just push the button and forget about it. That's how I do salary cap stuff. No, just kidding. If I'm looking back at last season, I'm actually having a hard time figuring out who the 49ers MVP was. There were a couple players that had a couple good weeks in a row, but maybe start to finish, George Kittle? And this is not a good thing to say about a team when you can't figure out who was the most critical player on the roster.
Well, yeah. So it just depends on how you define MVP. That's a debate that was happening very recently when Josh Allen narrowly won the MVP over Lamar Jackson. We
Yeah.
talked about it a lot last year, even within the 49ers team when both Purdy and Christian McCaffrey were finalists. I think if you just look at it flatly,
Right.
the quarterback is always going to be the most valuable player because that's how football is set up. He's
Sure.
not necessarily the best player, but the sport is set up to where you can't operate without your QB. The minute that Purdy went down, we saw it in that game against the Green Bay Packers. It got really, really ugly for the 49ers. But who was their best contributor this past season? Yeah, I would say George Kittle. Fred Warner was on track to be the defensive player of the year through 4 weeks, but then he broke a bone in his foot.
And played through it the whole time.
And he did.
Didn't
and
tell
we
anybody
just found
about
out
it.
that Kittle, though, was playing through a fractured rib.
Wow.
So, I mean, what he did was special. They're working on a contract extension for him now. It's going to be a lame duck year if they don't get that done. So that's a no-brainer. He's a future Hall of Famer. Warner's a future Hall of Famer. Those were the two best players on the team this past year. And what we're watching right now, I think it's really important that people appreciate what we're seeing from Kittle and Warner. And these are two homegrown guys who the 49ers obviously want to make 49ers lifers. It's a big deal. John Lynch will talk about it a lot. There's a wall in the facility that connects the locker room to the parking lot where every 49er who has been with the team for at least 10 years has his name on the wall. There are not a lot of names on that wall, but that when we talk about excellence and sustainability, being on the team for 10 years is really a hallmark of that, right? That's a building block for the ultimate goal that Shanahan and Lynch have. So they want to get another 10-year guy up on the wall. And Kittle came in 2017, so he is the next in line to be able to do that. And Warner came in 2018, so he'd be able to accomplish that the year after.
John Brody's name is not up there, is it?
Was he a 10-year guy?
I don't think he was. Look at you with the computer. You just pull stuff up. I'm not set up like that here. I just make.
I mean, you're sitting
in my
there
home studio.
in an aircraft cockpit. I'm shocked that you can't check that out.
I just make guesses and then I look it up afterwards. I mentioned
no,
that
he's a 10-year guy.
Oh,
1957 to 1973.
So check this out. So my namesake, is up on that wall. How about that? Did you know that?
John Brody is. Oh, I did not know that. I did not know that.
I wanted to slide
Brody
that in here in the conversation. Yeah. That's
well, go Stanford. You know, I got my start covering Stanford football, and John Brody obviously was one of the many players or coaches who have gone from Stanford to the 49ers successfully. So, and he's also your namesake. So that's really neat.
That's the connection. That's my connection. Robert Saleh, getting him back as the defensive coordinator. It's amazing because I've watched you cover this and the potential of him coming back and him ultimately now coming back. You've covered this almost as if like the defense is getting an additional player. A coach, a coordinator, whatever it is on a different team or sport, I feel like they have some impact. But again, what I'm interpreting from how you're covering this, it's almost like the 49ers are getting a star player on defense by who's going to lead their defense.
I think that this league requires two pillars for success. And we talk about it a lot with the quarterback position. People always argue about, is this Brock Purdy doing it? Or is it Kyle Shanahan calling the plays that are setting things up for Brock Purdy? And the answer always is both. Like, this is a team sport. This is a collaborative effort. There's never been a successful quarterback without a competent play caller. And there's never been a competent play caller without a successful quarterback to execute what he's doing. So same thing on the defensive side of the ball. You can have talent, but if it's not coordinated properly, especially in a league, people, I think, will watch college football on Saturdays where talent trumps everything because you have massive talent gaps.
Right.
And then they'll turn to the NFL on Sunday and think that their team is head and shoulders above the other team talent-wise. That's just not the case. Right. Even if you have a 2-15 team playing a 17 or 16-1 team, then you're going to have the very best players from their respective college teams on both of these NFL teams.
They're grown-ups.
The talent difference is not big. Yes.
Yeah.
So schematically, these are tiny margins that you're dealing with in the league. So who's coordinating, who's scheming, who's calling those plays on Sundays, who's trying to adjust in the second half or in the fourth quarter. I mean, a lot of these games, not just the outcome that's determined by a blitz here or there, it could be the difference between a blowout and a loss, like a blowout win and a narrow loss, right? These are very, very consequential decisions and nuances that are being affected by the guys up in the head coaching booth. So, or the coordinator booth. So in the case of Robert Saleh, this is somebody who implemented the system with the 49ers. He just brought in Gus Bradley, his former boss, who was the original coordinator of the Legion of Boom defense in Seattle. That's the system upon which the 49ers have based their defensive system. You look at it, Kyle Shanahan over the past 2 years, because he's swung and missed twice in a row now, defensive coordinator. I think there was a lot of stress in Kyle's brain about the defense, and he had to worry a lot about the defense screwing things up here and there. Well, the one way to absolve yourself of having to worry about the defense screwing things up is to have two former head coaches on your defensive staff, Robert Saleh and Gus Bradley, both of those guys who go back to their time with Seattle. They also have KJ Wright on the staff, who was the great linebacker for the Seahawks next to Bobby Wagner there. So I think that's at the gist of it, is that the 49ers want to get back to their identity, and they want to bring real big-time experience within the scheme that they're trying to run, and they do have it by re-signing Robert Saleh.
Speaking of Kyle Shanahan, and you can tell me if I'm crazy for just thinking this from the outside, and maybe this is too surface level, but if I just look at pictures of Kyle Shanahan, maybe it's the haircut, maybe the longer hair now makes me think of him differently.
Aged.
So, I wasn't going to say has he aged. Has he changed in your time being around him and covering the team? And has he changed, not maybe even as a person, but as his coaching style? How has he evolved in recent years? Or am I just crazy in thinking that his longer hair makes me think that he's actually different when he's not?
Well, it's almost like he's served 2 terms as the president at this point, right? From 2017 to 2025.
A lot of grays for me.
There's always the talk about how the presidency ages whoever holds that office. Well, being head coach of the 49ers through these past 8 years or so has definitely aged Kyle Shanahan. But unfortunately, the rigors of the job, and I think, I feel that at times, maybe more times than is fair, Kyle Shanahan has been treated unfairly in the media. And I don't think that I read a lot about Bill Walsh, and a lot of similar stuff happened in the 1980s, and he also got really stressed out doing that job.
Yeah.
So a lot of that wears on you over time. And because of that, this is one thing that is a negative when you're trying to cover Kyle Shanahan. I remember him in the early years when I was still a new NFL reporter being so candid and so insightful at these press conferences, and I would learn a lot. It really helped me develop as a reporter.
Right
now, because he's had to wade through a lot of crap,
burnt out.
Just to put it bluntly. So he's much more closed off speaking to the media. So as far as like the outward appearance of Kyle Shanahan and how he deals with reporters and how he is able to inform fans through some of those press conferences, they're nowhere near as insightful as they used to be. And it's funny because I'm reading this book. It's called The Genius. It's about Bill Walsh. The same exact pattern happened with Bill. He felt burnt a few times, and then he just the rigors and the stress of the job and dealing with the media. By the middle of his tenure, he became different, and apparently was also different in the way that he dealt with players as well. But we don't have that look into the locker room as often. So Kyle Shanahan has changed, but I think it's a natural part of the evolution of being a coach in just a really highly scrutinized job like the head coach of the San Francisco 49ers.
Probably not fair to lump CMC and Aiyuk in the same conversation, just both injured players is what I'm talking about. But for McCaffrey, I think there's a different thing going on here. You're worried that maybe, at least I'm worried, that he may never be able to come back and do it at a regular on a regular basis and at a certain level. Aiyuk, I think the only worry is like, how long is this injury going to take? And are we talking the start of next year, or what does it mean? How do you see those two players and their respective similar but different comebacks?
I'm actually not worried about McCaffrey because I think there's a misconception about his second injury. People think because of the way that he slid down in Buffalo that it was somehow related to the first one, and it wasn't at all. In fact, it was very ironic and tragic, even if you look at how it went, but he had regained full explosiveness, and he got hurt on a play that was very close to being a touchdown.
Yeah.
But a shoestring tackle from Taylor Rapp got him. The Achilles was fully healed by that point, which I think is remarkable in and of itself. He was struggling to walk to the bathroom a couple months before that. He described how tough it was.
On both Achilles, right?
Yeah, both Achilles, bilateral Achilles tendonitis, a lot of pain for Christian McCaffrey, but he was able to make his way back. And I think this illustrates just how special of a talent he is. He was able to make his way back to deliver an electric first quarter against the Bills.
Yeah.
I mean, it was fun to watch. He was fully back there. But Taylor Rapp, the safety, got him by a shoestring, and he slammed his knee down on the frozen turf. That's where he injured his PCL. It had nothing to do with the Achilles.
Or his age or breaking down. You're saying this was a product of not a freak thing, but just a football play versus, my body's breaking down. Right?
Yes, a football play.
Yeah.
So then what happened is, I think in any other circumstance, if Christian had just been, if he had been playing all season up to that, he would have subbed himself out of the game because he would have said something's wrong with my knee. But you have to understand the mental headspace that he was in. He was like, oh God, I do not want to be hurt again.
You did everything to get back. Right. I get it.
Yeah, I'm going to will my way through this injury. I'm just going to push it out of my head. I'm going to stay in for the next play. Doesn't tell anybody, stays in for the next play, gets the handoff, and immediately realizes
couldn't do it. Yeah. And people thought he got hurt actually on that play when, to your point, we all recognize that it was the play right before that with the tackle, the shoestring tackle.
Exactly. Yeah. So the optics of it were, there goes his Achilles again. He's got to slide down.
Right.
But it wasn't that.
Right.
It wasn't that. It was the knee, which Ed McCaffrey came out and said this week that Christian will be 100% healthy by next week, and he's going to get a full off season
next week.
And he's gotten rest.
Like next week.
Yeah, like after the Super Bowl next week.
I mean, that's a pretty quick recovery even from that, to be honest. I don't know. I didn't know how long this was going to take.
No, it wasn't an ACL.
Yeah.
It wasn't an MCL. It was a PCL. It was every sprain or strain or whatever you want to call it does have some degree of tear in it, but it wasn't a full rupture. So they were actually saying that he might be able to be back within 6 weeks if they would have made the playoffs. He could have been back at less than 100% for the playoffs. Obviously, that became a moot point very quickly for the 49ers. Now he's at 100%.
And then Aiyuk, in terms of him and his timeline, where does that stand, and what are your thoughts on it?
Well, so that was more than just an ACL. He also got the MCL, which is tough. Right. So whenever there's more than one, there's obviously potential complications. The good news there is that I saw him playing basketball in the locker room. They got a hoop set up late in the season in December, and he was elevating, he was jumping, which is a good sign as far as his recovery goes. What do you get hurt in week 7, I think? So it was on the early-ish side of the season. There's a chance that he's back for week 1 of 2025. Is it a slam dunk chance? Probably not.
Right.
Does it make sense to slow play it a little bit? Probably. And if that's the case, then maybe you see him on the PUP list, the physically unable to perform list, to start the season, which would mean he misses at least 4 games. That's what you usually see in cases like this. And he'd be back week 5. Now, that's just me spitballing right now. But yes, the ACL is not what the ACL used to be. Right? I almost think the Achilles rupture has replaced the ACL as the true career-threatening injury now, at least in terms of, is this guy going to get back to full explosiveness? But we've seen so many players, especially the ones on the younger end, come back to full explosiveness after the ACL tear. So I think that the 49ers are certainly hoping the same for Brandon Aiyuk.
Last thing here on the team, I mean, looking back, you'd have to consider the 49ers among the biggest busts in the NFL. I mean, just considering expectations to reality, and I know things on paper versus on the field are sometimes night and day. How does it set up next season? Like, what do you anticipate the storylines, the headlines to be? I know we don't have a full roster to talk about yet and that stuff figured out, but is this going to be like a revenge season? Is this going to be a prove it season? Is this going to be the window's closing season? What are you already thinking about how next year is going to shape up?
I think they will have a chance to play a fresh football season. They had played 60 games over 3 seasons entering 2024 without a Super Bowl trophy.
Right.
So the only other team that had played 60 games over 3 seasons was Kansas City.
And they won. They won a few things.
And they won. Yeah, you get that spiritual boost, right? From actually holding up the trophy at the end of the season, instead of the gut-wrenching feeling of losing that final game
in overtime.
In overtime. And then the year before, it happened in Philly after Purdy got hurt. And the year before that, it happened in LA when they blew the lead in the NFC Championship game after the dropped interception. I mean, those are three of the worst ways imaginable to go out in consecutive seasons. And that was all following the 2020 season that the 49ers finished living in a hotel in Arizona. So, and then that was after the 2019 season where they lost the Super Bowl to the Chiefs, where they blew a fourth quarter lead. So it's been an exhilarating 5-year run for the 49ers, but it's also been simultaneously crushing on both a physical and psychological level. So I think that it's not all that shocking to look back at the wheels coming off in 2025, especially given all the stuff outside of their control that happened, right? With the injuries, the Ricky Pearsall situation there. And then there was family tragedy.
Two players lost their children. Instances. Yeah.
And that's the only like off-field stuff that we know about, right? There could have been other stuff that we don't know about. So yeah, I mean, it's life. Sometimes things don't line up for you, right? And the 49ers, especially given the context of what they had gone through in the half decade prior, I think could really, really use the extra recovery time that they have this offseason. So I look at it as finally a chance to take a deep breath, reset, and start fresh in 2025.